All right, welcome to the presentation on intercultural, qualitative, international psychological research in refugee camps. This is Refugee Week, so this is a timely presentation. Okay, just a quick table of contents overview. We're going to begin with an overview of the research project being proposed, some numbers and the relevance of this research project, qualitative research methodology that will be applied, and then some themes. We'll look at some trauma research, some legal research, and some international psychological ethical considerations. And then we'll conclude. So an overview of the project, the research sample population will kind of be broken into two sections. We're going to try to look at people, we're going to look at participants who've been engaged in refugee camps for less than 2 years, and then those who've been engaged in refugee camps for over 5 years. So we're going to try to break all these demographics into two to see if we can't see some contrasts. But the participants will include refugees in the camps, guards, aid workers, policymakers, online communities of diaspora, and then documents like legal documents and camp complaints. The design is going to be qualitative, as qualitative research has been presented by Creswell. Grounded theory will be applied, discourse analysis, ethnography, and case study design. Data collection methods will include interviews, questionnaires, and archival sources. The setting will be online, in refugee camps, in archives, and the offices of organizations. So briefly, numbers and relevance. According to the UN Refugee Agency, over 80 million individuals have been forcibly displaced since 2000. It's a large number. 26.3 million of these individuals are refugees, hold refugee status. 67% of these individuals are from just 5 countries: Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. 39% of the hosts are just 5 countries: Turkey, Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, and Germany. And 86% of the refugees are hosted by developing countries. So we see this increased burden on countries that are already in the process of developing, with less resources than those that are developed. If we look at, so here to round out the number and relevance, not only are these individuals susceptible to social determinants of mental health after displacement, forced displacement from their home countries, but many of them, so not only are they experiencing increased stress while being in the camps, but many of them come from countries where human rights abuses are prevalent, and which compounds the problem, creating a greater need for attention on this issue to be researched. So the general research question: what is the status of mental health services in refugee camps, and how might they be improved? That's going to be our guiding question. So the research methodology that we're going to be implementing will include qualitative grounded theory, as Sharmaz and Creswell have covered in our material. This is especially important if we don't see any immediate patterns. So we're going into this, it's kind of good to go in with like a blank slate to try to avoid other pitfalls that previous researchers have fallen into. So we don't want to cover the same ground and fall into the same trends that they've already done. So it might be good to start with grounded theory and let some trends arise on their own. But once we have those, we kind of apply ethnography and ethnographic research diasporas, both in their home countries, within the camps, and those who've moved through the process, through the camps, all maintain, oftentimes they maintain certain online communities that would be able to, that are available to be engaged, to learn about what is being communicated, how they maintain their home culture, how that idea of identity shifts through camps, and how it is in each different demographic. It's an interesting 3 segments of a single demographic that we could look at through interviews and questionnaires. Camps also provide a highly isolated environment where ethnographic can be used. Going into a camp and kind of experiencing and observing the culture of these camps relative to our research question and topic is be a unique opportunity, and one where ethnographic research would certainly be applicable. Third, case study research. Once we have that one case study and we have our findings, we have a good case study, and perhaps we could apply this to a second camp. We could have a cross-case analysis. Again, camps are closed, controlled environments, and they're ideal for case study development. Research methodology continued. So just to look a little bit more narrowly at the process, coding is a process that begins with an inquiry into a set of data that involves a word or phrase that symbolizes, represents, or translates themes in the data that then form constructs of analysis. So if we're doing discourse analysis of interviews, we could be looking at how often words like sick is used, neglected, home, but also within, so there's within like the interviews of refugees, but we could also be looking at legal documents for doing themes like how often is mental health cited in the legislation that govern or the regulations that guide health services. Case studies. As would be developed here, a case study allows investigators to focus on a single case, retain a holistic real-world perspective, such as studying individual life cycles, organization manager processes, school performance. Again, refugee camps would be an ideal environment to develop a case study. So this research is going to contribute to the field. It's going to offer insight and build upon previous research probably. So there'd be further opportunity for analysis, comparing it to existing material, existing literature on the topic. New problems and thus new opportunities for improvement can be uncovered. So the first theme we're going to look at is kind of trauma research. Mental health and psychological support provides a variety of services to refugee populations, including mental health, neurological disorder treatments. Again, we have these two groups, the new and the old demographics, that will provide us with, should provide us with some contrast. Doctors and the old, these are old and new demographics of doctors who've been there, short-term, long-term, nurses, short-term, long-term, refugees, short-term, long-term, just to see how things shift over time. And then we also have the online diaspora communities who will be able to give us insight on how they experience the camp, but also how they see their fellows camp. They're like their relatives or who they might know to be still in the camp. So the online diaspora communities is an interesting resource. The mental health services theme of data collection. So we're going to be doing interviews, questionnaires, looking at medical documentation from the camps, complaints that refugees have filed. And doing this, we'll be able to gather just a lot of information to get that holistic insight. And then we'll also look at art, graffiti, songs. I mean, what kind of art is being developed in these camps? And are they singing? Are they dancing? What cultural practices are they continuing to engage in that might reflect some indication of their general well-being, their mental health? What's the content of the songs being developed? Content of schoolwork? Mental health services, the quality. What kind of training are the people getting? Are the practitioners getting prior to, during their time working at the camps? What's the personnel patient ratio? Access to medication, what is available for treatment? What kind of medication are they able to get their hands onto? So psychological support is also provided through education and other health related health activities. Education, what kind of education is the youth getting, the primary education? What kind of professional training, vocational training are adults getting? And in addition to the practical skills that they're learning, are they learning about maintaining positive mental health and mental health knowledge, mental health awareness. So are they aware of self-monitoring, but also community awareness? And then we have to look at the relationship between the nation, and the camp communities. Is stigma an issue? If the national news is projecting strong stigma, is that affecting the camp community? Some of those connections we can also take a look at. So moving on to the second big major theme here is going to be international legal research. The UN Declaration of Human Rights provides that all people, including refugees, have rights to healthcare. Building upon that, principles for the protection of persons with mental illness and improvement of healthcare kind of reinforces that. So we need to look at these international standards of healthcare and mental health, and then look at how they relate to domestic law. The relationship between, and even from domestic to the camp, and even their origin countries. So if we have people who expect certain levels of legal protection, legal rights in their home country, and they move to a new country and live within a camp within that country, we then see how different notions of what legal activism might look like, and how this could cause dissidence. And there might be protests, and a variety of different circumstances could arise. But the report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, healthcare provided must align with national law. So healthcare within a refugee camp still must be aligned with the national law. So just looking at these dynamics as they're written out, be an opportunity for a little more just analysis of documentation analysis in addition to the interviews and questionnaires. And again, lastly, there's refugee camp law. What is the unique laws and social norms that govern camp behavior? If the refugees hold a very different notion of social norms, it's a very secular country, but a very religious community in the camps, how might those dynamics play out in what is practiced as regulations and protocol within the camp? So in addition to that, the protection of which is further defined by the principles of protections of persons, mental health and improvement, the Global Compact on Refugees. This is one of the more recent information, more recent documentation on status of refugees. A lot of this kind of begins to, some of these documents are older, so we see some newer stuff coming out, but it's just becoming more proactive. It's just reinforcing the earlier former data. Okay, so engaging in international psychological research, we need to think about ethics. In the international setting, practitioners of psychology and those party to the Universal Declaration of Ethical Principles for Psychologists need to abide by the mandates provided within the international agreement. Treatment, what kind of treatment is being implemented in these camps? Are they following international standards? But also the researcher themselves. Are the appropriate authorities being informed of the research? Sometimes you need to contact certain levels of government or the community leaders to make sure you're not infringing on any rights or any social norms when you're doing your research. We also need to make sure we're getting consent, following other IRB ethical considerations if we plan on publishing the work. Creswell goes into a lot more detail about this related to qualitative research, but essentially we need to make sure we're protecting the participants from harm and in disclosing comprehensive findings. We don't want to be biased in presenting our findings and just focus on a single issue and neglect other issues, because all issues might be really important to certain members of our audience. So just to review the relevance, the numbers from the UN reflect a need for further research on this issue, especially, this is Refugee Week, it's timely. Research design, we're doing qualitative, grounded theory to begin with. And then as themes arise, we can start really engaging, focusing on discourse analysis, ethnography, and developing our case study. Themes covered, we're looking at trauma and mental health practices and conditions within camps, related international, domestic, and camp law, and how those all interact, the dynamics between these different layers of law. And then we need to consider ethical practices, not only for the practitioners in the camp, but for researchers. So in conclusion, refugee camps provide a unique sample group that the research methodology that sample group for the research methodology discussed here, it can be uniquely applied to investigate new areas of research as they arise in multicultural settings on the international stage. And there's the references. Thank you for your time.